Hi, I'm Ernest Cline, the author of Ready Player One and one of the screenwriters of the upcoming film adaptation of Ready Player One. Well, Ready Player One is a story about an eccentric video game designer named James Halliday who dies in the opening pages of the story and leaves behind his fortune and this virtual world that he's created called the Oasis, which has kind of replaced the internet. Upon his death, he makes an announcement that whoever finds this Easter egg that he's hidden inside the virtual world will inherit his fortune and control of the virtual world.
Hello. If you're watching this, I'm dead.
Our story follows a group of young heroes who are in pursuit of this Easter egg and trying to win the contest. And they're competing against an evil corporation called Innovative Online Industries, led by Ben Mendelsohn, who is trying to win the contest as well, and they're willing to, commit real murder in the real world to prevent our heroes from winning. The original idea that I had of what if Willy Wonka was a video game designer and held his golden ticket contest inside his virtual reality video game. That was the original story. I wasn't even sure I could get it published, when it was done. And I also assumed it would never be a movie because of all the pop culture references I wanted to weave into the story. When I had the initial idea of the eccentric video game designer and I started to think about the riddles and puzzles and clues that he would leave behind, and I started to think about what those could be, I realized, they could deal with his passions, his favorite movies and books and video games, and that got me really excited because it was a way for me to pay tribute to the things that I love and weave them into the story. As I was 5 years old when Star Wars came out, and that was the first time I ever geeked out on anything. I became obsessed with Star Wars. Would make up stories, with my action figures, imagining what the next Star Wars film would be. Right around the same time, 1978, I became obsessed with video games, science fiction novels, and then Dungeons and Dragons. I realized I was kind of a almost stereotypical geek in every way. And I thought I was the only kid like that in the whole world because I was a nerdy kid and a little bit antisocial, but I also just had a longing for adventure and a longing for escapism. So much good fortune has come to me because I was born in the 70s and grew up in the 80s, and it was a wonderful time to be a kid because I was part of the first generation to have video games, first generation to have home computers, and also just a golden age for cinema, especially for movies for young kids that are filled with adventure and magic. Like there's nothing quite like 80s movies. Steven Spielberg was the one who made that happen, so I think if the script and the book had found its way to any other filmmaker, it probably wouldn't have gotten made. It found its way to the one person who could have pulled it off. He is one of the creative people who filled my childhood with magic and adventure, and I would study his movies. Once I got his movies on videotape, I would watch them over and over again and study how they were put together, and wanted to be like him and wanted to tell stories, bring as much joy and illumination as possible to as many of your fellow human beings as possible. Then Steven Spielberg is one of the most successful artists in the history of our species. So that's what he represents to me.